right, so welcome back, those of you who were had the fortitude to return after the first hour of the dissection or / anatomy of the IEP. You have great courage to return for part 2 because this is we know this is a really unwieldy process. After we spoke last week, some things that came up for me that I just wanted to kind of point out. One thing I didn't really touch on, and let me go back to that slide, is just about why the special factors page matters. So we talked about it a little bit, but I didn't really talk about, let me just skip back there, sorry. This is the page where they ask, there's certain special factors. Did I skip it? No, maybe it's back here. Maybe I haven't gotten, oh, here it is. Okay, so special factors page is where they look at these 5 areas: behavior, whether or not English is your second language, blindness or visual impairment, communication needs for the deaf or hard of hearing, and assistive technology. I'm not sure I really articulated. So in the IEP, when we talked before, I mentioned about like that parent concerns letter and how important that is, because when you get your parent concerns in the IEP, now they have to be addressed somewhere in the IEP. So everything in the IEP that is stated as a concern or a need, et cetera, has to be addressed somewhere in the IEP. So it's the same thing with the special factors. If this section, and I'll just show you the couple examples here again. If this section is not robust or it's not accurate, which we talked about last time, you want to make sure that it is. Don't skip this page. A lot of parents don't even know, they've never spent any time on the special factors page, and they don't know what, even what it is or what it's for. So it's important that every part of the IEP is correct, because if it's incorrect and they're basing the IEP on inadequate or incorrect data, you're gonna have a poor IEP. And then as we're going through the PLAF, the present levels of academic and functional performance, another thought that kind of, I lay awake at night thinking about these things. This is what I do, right? So we went through all of this last time, and this is all in the recording. So those of you who missed it, don't get worried. But what I found with this IEP that I use as an example is the IEP team is telling us what the needs are in the current IEP. Even though there are errors and mistakes and whatnot, they are pulling from evaluation data, and they are stating in the IEP what the needs are of this child. So you can use their own reporting, because they did a really good job of putting a lot of the data that the parent provided and outside evaluations. There's a lot of information here. Now you just want to make sure that they're connecting the PLAF to the goals, and then the goals to the accommodations and services, right? So it's not that it's not in here, it's just that we need to make sure we tease it out, and that they're taking the data through that process to get you to the services that the child needs. And then again, really correcting those errors is essential. The other thing is with the PLAF, the present level of parent input, sorry, I'll go back. Do you understand it, right? So if they're talking about a measurement, I talked to a parent last night actually who said the child's team uses X benchmark measurement system for reading. And I said, great, what does that measure? What aspect of reading? Parent had no idea. How often is it given? No idea. Where is your child in terms of like, well, it's 34 out of 39. I'm like, great, what is 34? And 39 is the quote unquote benchmark for that grade level. Well, what is 39? Is 39, does that mean that the child's at the bottom 30th, the 30th percentile? Like if you were looking at a range of kids, maybe they're saying that norm, like the benchmark would be 30 to 80%, and the child is actually at the 30th percentile compared to age peers. Normally, these benchmark assessments don't have age norms, but you can still ask the team, where does she fall or the child fall on the range of what you're benchmarking? You need to understand the present levels, and if you don't, you need to ask questions until you do, and ask them to write it in a way that makes sense. And then the other thing is, does it cover all areas of suspected disability? So for example, with reading, if the child hasn't been assessed in the big 5 areas of literacy, and that's not addressed in the present levels and then the goals and services, then that's a problem. So then you're going back to the assessment step where you're asking for more of a robust assessment. I'm going to pause here for a second. A couple people just joined. I'm diving right into part 2. Part 1 was recorded and shared with you. It'll be on our website soon, on our YouTube channel soon. There is a comment in the chat about looking for someone from New Jersey. So for that parent, I'm happy to make a connection for you if I can find someone If you could message me, that would be helpful. A Vernick at epilepsysurgeryalliance.org. And you should have my email because I'm the one that sends you all these invites. And then I'm happy to try to make a connection for you. All right. So anytime during the presentation, if you have a question, raise your hand, unmute, and I'm happy to take your questions throughout. So now I'm going to go back to where we left off last time. Those are just the things that kept me awake at night that I wanted to make sure I gave you enough detail for those to make sense. So we've talked about how if the PLAF statement, that present levels of academic and functional performance statement, is bad, then you're going to have a bad IEP. So this is some examples of a bad PLAF statement. If it doesn't change from year to year, that's a problem, right? Your child is going to change from year to year. And it shouldn't just be strengths. A lot of times I see so-and-so is a happy, joyous kid and greets everyone when they arrive at school. And there's not a lot of other information. We want to know strengths and weaknesses and need areas. Again, if it lists test scores that aren't self-explanatory, you're going to ask questions. If it uses highly technical language that you don't understand, you're going to ask them to write it in plain language. Imprecise language, again, that borderline, low average, below average. You should be asking all these questions to your team and say, make me understand it, right? And if I can't understand this language, use different language, right? Uses terms and references that cannot be interpreted without the use of test manuals, or uses vague terms or phrases. So if it's non-specific, that's also a problem. Like the present level statement that says the student has a sense of humor, likes to help the teacher, and enjoys his peers, that might be helpful information for the team to know, but it's not really central to what we need in the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. Julie says it should also include your child's strengths. And I agree, because you want to make sure that they're working on the deficits and not working on the strengths. So for example, let's say the child is reading on fluency benchmark assessment, is reading at a kindergarten level, but they're in 3rd grade. And then we do the breakdown assessments and we look at each area of reading, right? So phonics, phonemic awareness, fluency, vocabulary comprehension. I think I'm getting one wrong, but someone will chime in and correct me. Let's say that the phonics and reading fluency and all of that is the kindergarten level, but her comprehension, the child's reading comprehension, is at grade level. So then now you're giving this child all kindergarten level texts because their decoding is poor or their oral reading fluency is poor. But their comprehension about a story is at grade level, right? So that student should have instruction in the deficit areas and should be given opportunities to listen to stories and respond to comprehension questions at grade level. So that's another reason why we want to really focus on those kind of specific strengths as well and look at all the breakdown score areas. Okay. Another thing you might see on your child's IEP is this page is blank. This is just an example page. This is from a California IEP. We use the form SACE. It's SEIS. I have no idea what it stands for. Every state has their own form, but it's going to tell you, this page is the reporting on the scores that your child received on testing, state and local testing, right? So this should be filled in. This should not be blank. This is actually from my son's IEP and it was blank. So each area they were assessed in, it should say, was the standard exceeded, met, nearly met, or not met, et cetera. Ask to see the reports from this and look at usually you can get a score report where it tells you more detail about, rather than just these 4, met, not met, nearly met, whatever, which doesn't mean anything. And they might not do every test every semester or every school year. Usually they alternate. You just want to know what those scores are and make sure they're reported in the present levels, because this is part of the overall picture of your child. You may not be opting in to local and state testing, and that's fine. You have a right not to. So if you're not opting in to any testing, if you're saying, no, I don't want my child to participate, these will be blank for that reason. But if the child is doing testing, you want to make sure that their test scores are reported here. And the top ones up here are just our standard California state measures, would include English language, reading, writing, blah, blah, blah. Science, it would be in certain grades. I think they do that, in 8th and 11th grade. CMA, that's a modified assessment for science. This is the one, CELDT is for English language. PE testing happens in grades 5, 7, and 9 in California. So you want to just make sure, don't skip don't skip any section of the IEP. Make sure you understand each page and what should be on it or what is wrong on it if it's wrong. I'm getting a comment that Pennsylvania doesn't have an at-a-glance in thick IEPs. And so there is an at-a-glance shared on our website. So IEP at a glance is basically, it pulls certain sections of the IEP, like the present levels. So it starts with the eligibility. I think it lists accommodations and goals. I think that's all that's on the at-a-glance. There is a sample one on our website that you can click a button in SACE, the system that's used in California, and get this kind of at-a-glance. It's designed for like a substitute teacher or, you know, a new team member. I would caution you that if they are planning to use a tool like this for anyone, that you insist that only trained staff work with your child if they're very complex, and that the sub would rotate to another classroom or student, right? So that you have backup trained one-to-one support or even another teacher. Usually there's a couple teachers teaching a grade. So just be careful about those at-a-glances. I could talk more about that another time. I didn't really include that in this presentation. And then this is what the testing accommodations page would look like. So basically it's saying these are the tests that this child will take during this IEP period that we're creating this IEP for. So in this one, he was supposed to be taking English Language Arts SBAC, which is the Smarter Balanced Assessment Curriculum, which is California's tool. In math, he was taking math SBAC, and then in science, he was taking science, and then PE with modifications, et cetera. But then on the right, you'll see that there's one accommodation listed, calculator and multiplication table. So this is my son's IEP. When I went back and looked at this, I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. What he really needs is he needs a reader, a human reader for all test questions, and a scribe, and it needs to be in a totally quiet room. So they were only addressing some of his needs, not all of them, right? So you want to make sure you spend some time on this page and talk about like what are the supports that the child's going to need to do this standardized testing if you want to do it and you feel it will be valuable. The other thing is a lot of these kids, they're computer-based tests. And for the younger kids, maybe they've never done this test before. So they should be taught how to navigate the system or have someone that assists them with it, which is why I like a human reader and a scribe, because it takes away all the technical responsibility from the child and just focuses on what they know. So again, just another section that you should be aware of so you're not missing that. So the PLAF, our PLAF man is our man that holds up everything in the IEP, fed by these present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, but there has to be a connection from the PLAF to the goals and services. There has to be a bridge. And you also have to ask yourself, after you look at that PLAF statement, is there enough information in this PLAF to develop a challenging, ambitious, measurable goal? So I hear a lot from parents that say to me, my child has services in, let's say, vision, but they have no goals. And then we look at the IEP and there's no present levels for vision at all. Even though the vision teacher might have done an evaluation, even though the vision teacher thought it was enough to come and do consultation once a week, but there's nothing in the present levels. And as I showed you last time, parent input in the present levels is permitted. So you should be going through each section of the present levels. Like if their vision section is blank, or it's just a very short thing and you know a lot more about your child and their vision and how they use it, you can say, I'd like to add a parent input statement to that section. And the other thing, is there enough information in this PLAF to determine what special education related services, accommodations, and program modifications are needed? So when you think about those two things, if you can't say yes to both of this, enough to develop goals and determine special education related services, accommodations, and modifications, if the PLAF doesn't give you the information to do that, you need a better PLAF. That's ultimately at the end of the day. So now we're going to move, what are we going to talk? Okay, so I'm going to move on to goals now. And this all ties together, right? So none of this is one separate thing. It's like the knee bone is connected to the shin bone, right? Like it's all part of a big picture, and you can't take any one thing in isolation. I was actually talking to one of our education working group, fabulous volunteers yesterday about our goals spreadsheet and how confusing it can be if you don't understand the process. You can't just drop into the goals spreadsheet and say, I want to write a goal. You have to understand all of this, right? It's a big convoluted mess sometimes, but hopefully not. So the IEP has to state annual goals for the child. However, I will caveat that to say I helped a young man. He's now I think he's 19. He's a freshman in college. He was in 8th grade, and I helped with the IEP at a child who had epilepsy, and he had no goals. So he had an IEP and he had some services, but he had no goals. And I'm like, how does this even happen? He also had a terrible PLAF. So, but the IEP, the law says the IEP must state annual goals for the child. Part of having an IEP, it's not just that you have a disability, it's that you require special education. And if you require special education, that's delivered through goals and services, right? So you have to have IEP goals. The goals have to relate to meeting the needs that result from the child's disability. And they also have to help the child participate in and make progress in the general education curriculum. And the IEP also has to state how the school personnel will measure the child's progress towards the annual goals, when it will provide progress reports on the child's progress. So I'm going to talk a little bit about progress as well. So here is what the law says, section 300-320A, if you want to go look up the law. And if you haven't, I highly recommend you do. There's another part of this, I pretty much just told you all of that, but the other thing is that it also, there would be a statement for children with disabilities who take alternate assessments aligned with alternate achievement standards. There also have to be benchmarks in their goals. So I have a big caution about aligning a child's curriculum to alternate achievement and alternate assessments, depending on the child's functional ability. I think a lot of times for kids who've had epilepsy surgery, the school team will just assume, well, they're not going to be able to learn anything. And so there's a very low floor of opportunity. There's not a ceiling, there's a floor, right, that they're providing. So you really want to be looking at an ambitious IEP goals, ambitious services, et cetera. We'll talk a little bit about that as we move on here. So what do goals need to be? So they have to be measurable. What is measurable? Can you count it, right? So that would be if I say, Lisa will be a better conversational speaker by the end of the school year. How do you measure that? If I say Lisa will engage in 3 turn-taking exchanges with a peer as measured in 5 out of 5 opportunities weekly, with X scaffolding and support, right? Given X instruction, given X supports, that would be more measurable, because then I can say at the end of the year, well, the data has that she only did it 1 out of 3 times. So what do we need to change? Do we need to increase the services? Do we need to change the goal, et cetera? It also has to be achievable. It has to be something that can be reached in 1 year. So for example, if your child is at level K in reading and you want them to get to L, I don't even know what comes after K. You want to get them to level L in reading in 1 year. That's only a partial year of progress. I'm talking about Fondas and Pinnell, by the way. This is just one of many benchmarking systems. So let's say we want to go from level K to level L in Fondas and Pinnell in 1 year. That's not a year's worth of progress in that system. So you want to look at what is the benchmarking system, what are they using in your school, and what is a year's worth of progress. So for most kids, it's going to be 2 or 3 levels per year is what's considered that appropriate progress in that program, right? In that curriculum. It's not actually a curriculum, it's a benchmarking system, but you get the idea. So that would be too low. You would want to have a year's worth of progress in a year according to that, that benchmarking system, if the child can do that, right? Not every child can do this. It would also be things like the child is currently doing 2-digit addition with 20%, accuracy and success, right? We're going to have in a year, they can do it at 30%. That's really low, right? In a year, if you're working on 2-digit addition, in a year, the kid should have mastered 2-digit addition. So you really want to be thinking about, is this goal too low? Or also, is it too high, right? So sometimes teams write goals that there's no way that child's going to achieve it in a year. And then they just keep repeating the goal from year to year and say, well, haven't met it yet, haven't met it yet, haven't met it yet. That's not good either. The goals have to contain challenging objectives, and this doesn't necessarily refer to those benchmark objectives that are related to if you're in the alternate assessment, but it has to have something in the goal that is challenging. This is based on the Andrew F. Supreme Court decision. I sent you guys a handout about that, talking points. You can find them on understood.org. They have a great set of talking points you can download about how to make sure your goals are aligned to challenging challenging measures. And what this says is that in light of the child's circumstances, which is where things get harder for us, is the child able to make progress in the general education curriculum? So this can be a little bit of a gray area, but you want to be pushing for challenging objectives in the IEP goals. It has to include academic and functional goals. So we want those reading goals, the big 5, we want the math goals, science, whatever, and also self-care, vocational, social skills, emotional, behavioral. Because remember, the PLAF is academic achievement and functional performance. That's what we're looking at. It has to enable the child to make progress in the gen ed curriculum, so it should be aligned with the curriculum. If the child can't make grade level progress equal to their peers, we need to know why, and how is the team going to address that? Are they going to provide additional instruction or tutoring or other supports for the child? Are they going to extend their graduation date? Is this a child that's just never going to meet those standards? And are you as a parent aware and really comfortable with that mindset? So you really have to understand, if the child isn't accessing gen ed curriculum or making progress in that curriculum, why not? And what are they going to do about it? It has to meet all of their other educational needs. I mentioned last time that if you have another area of need that your child does not have eligibility on their IEP for, like let's say your child has a speech IEP, they're eligible for an IEP for speech, but they also need assistive technology or literacy support. They don't need to meet criteria in another eligibility category to receive supports in another area of need if the team agrees that those supports are needed. The IEP team can just decide, we are going to provide counseling for this child because it's clear that they need it, without them meeting criteria for a social emotional disturbance, right? Which the eligibility for that. Goals should not be repeated year after year. I have seen IEPs where the same goal was just repeated year after year, and the parent being told, well, your child hasn't met that goal yet. Again, child's not meeting goals. Why not? Why are they not meeting these goals? Okay. Sorry, I see something in the chat. Just a thank you. You're welcome. Okay. And let's see what else. Students and parents must be involved in developing these goals. Students by transition age, which is 14 or 16, depending on your state. But I would say even younger, as early as you can, to start to include your child in goal development so they understand what they're going to be working on and that they have some buy-in. But parents really need to be involved in developing goals for the child's IEP. It's not an IEP that the team writes and you agree to it. You are part of writing it, okay? So here's an IEP goal formula. There's a million of these out there. I really like the given, right? Here she has it at the end, and supports, right? And what supports. I like to say at the beginning of the goal, given multisensory evidence-based literacy instruction for 60 minutes a day, 5 days a week, comma, and X, and whatever other maybe accommodations for literacy the child needs, comma, by next year, John will, increase reading fluency from X level to X level, whatever your benchmarking system is that you're using in the classroom setting, or maybe it's across all settings, as measured by, how are they measuring it? Are they using an assessment they made up? Are they using observation? Are they using a benchmark assessment that is a published thing that you can look at and understand? And then accuracy level. Oftentimes I see things like 80% accuracy in 2 out of 3 trials. So if the child is if you went to your job and you did something like kind of 80% well at 2 out of 3 times that you showed up at work, you'd be fired, right? And this is not going to help our kids move towards progress and success. And if you do the math on that, 80% accuracy 2 out of 3 times ends up being something like 60%. So I like to see 80 or 90% in 5 out of 5 trials, right? 4 out of 5 is often used, 3 out of 4 observed opportunities, et cetera. You might see different language like that, but be really clear. And it might be different based on what you're measuring. So for example, if your child is learning the alphabet, they need 100% success in letter ID and letter sounds in order to make progress in reading. So there really shouldn't be anything less than that. I've heard orientation and mobility teachers tell me, I'm not going to set a street crossing goal that's less than 100%. Because I don't want my kid to die, right? So it depends on what you're measuring. There may be other things where the child is you're just starting something new that's maybe like a behavior goal or a social goal, and the child is very low in their ability, and you're going to start low. Maybe you're going to have 60% in a year of success, and that might be appropriate for for that student at that time. And then the next year, you're going to push it up to 80. And then maybe the following year, you're going to push it up to 100% in all settings, right? So you're going to really think about each of these pieces. A couple comments in the chat. From the comment on parent input, on parent and student input, someone said sometimes it really pushes the team to be creative to get student input. For example, my child really wanted to play soccer with her friends at recess. Her physical therapist figured out a way to write a goal to work on that, which was cool. I love that. And then Julie, who will be speaking to us, I believe, next week, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, next week. Julie Gardner's an educational specialist. She says that observation alone isn't good enough. It can be part of the goal monitoring, but not all of it. Some schools like to say teacher observation for everything, and that's way too subjective. Really good point, Julie. I agree with that. So I think, remember I said before about what makes a good goal, right? You have to be one of the first things is it measurable? Can you count it, right? So if they say teacher observation as they're measured by, how are you counting that? What's the data? Is it written observation? Is it like a narrative that you get every week that says, today it seems like so-and-so was really engaged in X, maybe you're measuring something that is a little more abstract. There are rare occasions where that would be the case, but you have to be able to count it, right? So it would be better to say by observation and data collection, and then ask the team, what data are you collecting and how often? I was surprised to find out that most reading instruction data should be collected twice a week for young children, right? I think someone on this call told me that. So asking the team for each goal, it might be different for every single goal, right? So this shouldn't be a formulaic thing that looks the same in every single goal. What else do I want to say here? And then the supports I talked about, like at the beginning, I like it at the beginning. She has it at the end. What are the supports that are needed? Write it in the goal. Some teams will say, well, that's what the accommodations are for. I'm like, the accommodations might be 60 items long or 100 items long, right? The accommodations. I want someone who has never worked with your child to be able to pick up this IEP and say, in order to work on this goal, this is what this child needs. So given a timer, a writing rubric, and a written prompt, and 3 prompts throughout the 10-minute period, Susie will write a personal essay about what she did this weekend with no more than X errors, whatever it is going to be. But do you see how specific we got, right? It's really, you want to be as detailed as possible. That target behavior, what do we want the student to be able to do? That I always highlight when I look at IEPs. I always highlight just that part, the goal, because there's so much other stuff here. Sometimes we forget, what is this about? So the goal is, what will the child be doing and when this goal is met? And you can just ask the team, describe my child, what they will look like when they are doing this, when the goal is met, because sometimes these goals are so confusing, parents don't even understand what they're actually measuring. So what is it that we want to see this child do? And again, in what setting? So it might be that in one-on-one speech therapy, Travis will articulate, I'm not a speech therapist, so this is a terrible example, but you get the idea. We'll articulate with a proper phoneme, blah, 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 right? In that room. But then he goes out to the classroom and he can't do it, right? Or maybe it's that, like, in one-on-one OT executive function sessions, this student will articulate all the steps of a social interaction and does great, 100% every single time. The OT is saying, we don't even need to work on this anymore. This kid's so good. This is a real life example. And then you say, go in the yard, follow that kid into the yard after your session. Recess is right after your OT session. Would you follow him in the yard? And he can't do it at all, completely falls apart in the real life. So we want to know what it will look like. So what I would want for that last example is I would want the kid to be able to say in the OT or speech therapy room, in the executive function training, this is what the appropriate behavior will be, social behavior will be when I go out in the yard. And then he'll go out on the yard and display that appropriate social behavior. And that's how we're measuring it. So the setting would be across all settings, not just in the therapy room. Really, really important. We want that behavior, whatever we're measuring, to be observable and measurable. We want it to be functionally relevant. If it's behavior, is it a functionally relevant replacement behavior, not a punishment? Really, really important. Is it a measure of student behavior, not adult behavior? So a lot of times I see goals that are really written for the adults, which is not the end of the world because the adults are implementing this, but just to be aware of that. Condition we talked about, level of achievement, and then the time frame when they'll meet it. So I think that pretty much covers that slide. Any questions? We'll show a couple examples here. Okay, just pop them in the. So this is an example from an actual IEP. So you can see that I highlighted over here. When provided with a slant board, that's the given. When provided with a slant board, EGOs, grasp, adaptive handwriting paper, and verbal prompts, student will accurately imitate 15 out of 26 capital letters for 3 out of 4 consecutive progress monitoring sessions with data collected monthly. So I would like this in 4 out of 4, because does he get a day off, or does he just like doesn't have to do this sometimes? And I would want to see 26 out of 26 for an annual goal. And if they're saying there's no way he can meet this goal annually, why not? Does he need some sort of support with where his hand is held or positioned in order to do this, right, et cetera? So you want to really make sure you're making sure the goal is ambitious, but also achievable, and that you're measuring it across every opportunity, so you have a data point every single time. And 3 out of 4 progress monitoring sessions, data collected monthly. I think this is probably an OT goal, so maybe they're not doing daily check-ins, but if we're a classroom teacher, I would want data collected twice a week. For OT, someone who might only see the child once a week, I think that's okay. I put in red here, every goal needs a baseline. So we don't know what this child's goal should be until we see what the baseline is. The baseline, excuse me, can be derived from the present levels, but the baseline generally does not have annual evaluation data in it. It's got more current progress monitoring data. You can reference also the annual need that was, you know, as we saw from so-and-so's IEP, this child struggles with handwriting. Our current baseline data shows that he can only imitate 3 out of 26 capital letters. Let's say that's what the baseline was for this goal, and 0 out of 26 lowercase letters. So then you would want to write a goal for each area. I like splitting out capital and lowercase if it's really a need area. And then the other thing is, I said, can he write words? Because writing letters might be boring. So you also want to think about, how is this goal being worked on, and ask the team, how will you be working on this? And is it in a way that it might be more interesting for him to practice writing words that he knows, or writing on topics that he's interested in, rather than just practicing letter writing over and over and over again, right? And thinking about what order those letters will be addressed in. Let me give another example here. This is when communicating across school settings, so they put the location first. So-and-so will use his voice and/or voice output device to communicate various language functions in at least a 2-word phrase, given no more than 1 verbal cue. So there might be more to the given, like what other supports does he need in order to meet this goal? I might want to build that out a little bit more. I would want to say something like, given a quiet setting without distractions, because I happen to know this child has a central auditory processing disorder. Adequate, which you would have to define what adequate is, wait time for processing, breaks, how often, how many, et cetera, for attention and visual fatigue, 90% of the time in 5 out of 5 trials measured over a 6-week period, et cetera, right? Or communicating across school settings happens every day. So this should maybe it's measured twice a week, data is collected twice a week, and who collects the data, right? Is it the speech therapist? Is it para trained to collect the data? If so, you have to write that training in the IEP and say the para will be trained in collecting the data. All right. I'm going to try to move a little quickly here so I can get through all of these. Here's just another example. The baseline here was interesting because it says that he was able to do this with less than 80% accuracy. So my question here was, how much less? Is he at 50%? Or is it 79%? That matters. I want to know how far away from the goal, because they're going to 80%. So again, to make sure it's an appropriate goal, if he's at 79% accuracy and the goal is to get him to 80% in a year, that's not a good goal. But if he's at 0% or 20%, then maybe he's going to need additional supports and services to meet this goal, right? So we really need to have an accurate baseline in order to be able to write a goal. I would want to add things like givens such as vertical presentation, because we know this child has a visual field loss due to homonymous hemianopia. Is there going to be wait time? Does he need visual breaks? I pulled these comments out of their own present levels when they described his testing environment. So remember how I said everything's in this IEP, you just need to help them connect the dots. So when they tested him, they gave him vertical presentation, they gave him wait time, they gave him visual breaks. So if that's not given to him when he's learning as well, they've decided it was needed, why aren't they providing that all the time, right? Okay. Something is in the chat here. I'm not sure how he's going to receptively identify something either. Was that in there? Receptively identify, yeah. So that's a good point, Julie. So it needs, again, when you're saying, what will this child be doing when this goal is met? The teacher should be able to say, she's going to say, he will receptively identify the function or attributes of this picture, icon, or item, like the dog is furry, the box is blue, whatever. How? Is he going to talk to you? He's an AAC user. Is he using his device? Are they creating pages for him to work on different skill sets that have keywords on them already, so he doesn't have to hunt and pack through the whole AAC device, etc. She said he needs a statement about he will demonstrate X by X. So he will do this by doing this. So he'll demonstrate this skill by doing this activity, or how he will do it. Really good point. We could and probably will do a whole hour on goal writing, because it's a thing unto itself. In this one, 2 out of 3 trials is 66%. So I would never want a goal that is only 66% in a year. So I want to see, and again, this is a lot of things in one goal. So I would say what's the baseline for how many steps can he ascend right now, with or without a handrail? Is it with or without? And alternate stepping. So I want the baseline to say, this student can ascend 0 steps without a handrail, with using an alternate step pattern. The goal will be that by the end of this year, he will ascend 10 steps with a handrail, using alternate stepping, right? Or without a handrail, maybe that's what the goal is. So that's one goal. And then as measured by data collection, every over a 6-week reporting, 5 out of 5 trials, 90% accuracy, et cetera. I think being able to walk up and down stairs is pretty important. So I would want a high level of accuracy. Accessing the elevated play with appropriate self-support. I don't even know what that means. So I would want the IEP team to really explain what that is. I would have 4 goals here. I would have better measurement criteria. So 90% accuracy in 5 out of 5 trials as measured over a 6-week reporting period or a 4-week reporting period, et cetera. You can see that in the benchmark down below, they said the first time he's going to do it 1 out of 3 trials, the first benchmark, and then by the end of the year, it's going to be 2 out of 3. That seems like a big gap. So there should be 3 benchmarks that you're breaking it down. So you're seeing a little bit of progress every quarter or trimester. Okay. This one was, I don't see it. The baseline was 20%, which I thought was interesting. When given, so the given, I think should be the support. When given, what are the supports that he needs? A number line, a calculator, a special math paper, whatever it is. The student will complete 10 double-digit addition adtraction problems without borrowing, with 80% accuracy on 4 to 5 trials measured biweekly, right? So the given is, what does he need to do that? The task is double-digit addition or subtraction. And then also, I like in the goal, what grade level are they working on? So for math and language arts goals, I want to see, is this a kindergarten grade level goal and the child is in 2nd grade? Technically, they're supposed to align it to a standard, but sometimes you'll see it says CC 211B3 as the standard. If you guys can all see that right here. That doesn't mean that the goal is written to that standard. That means that's the one they're aligning it to. But so are they giving him then 2nd grade math content, right? They're saying they're aligning it with a 2nd grade standard. Are they actually measuring him, giving him 2nd grade math problems to do for that double-digit addition and or subtraction problems without borrowing, right? You want to really be clear about that. So my proposed math goal that I suggested was, when given a 5-question math probe on the current skill being taught at a kindergarten level, 2D shapes, 3D shapes, basic addition, subtraction. Oh, this is not the one I wrote. I'm sorry. I'm like, this is a terrible goal. I didn't write this. This was their new proposed math goal. I think he's in 2nd grade. So they want to have him do a kindergarten math goal. And so this was the new goal they wrote for the math goal. So again, I look at this in blue is what my comments were. That was their new proposed goal that they were going to add. So they basically were taking a second grade goal and turning it into a kindergarten level goal. Red flags all over the place. So if you're not already working with Julie Gardner or an advocate, I highly recommend that you get one, any parent that is facing this. So this doesn't tell us what specific tasks he struggles with, because he had some higher scores and some lower scores in his math. In this IEP, up above in the present levels, they told us this, right? So they should target the skill that he's mastered, not all skills, because they're basically proposing a probe on all kindergarten level math skills, but he didn't do poorly on all of them. He only did poorly on some of them. So maybe he does a goal that's targeting the kindergarten level math skills he did poorly on, which my guess is going to have to do with visual spatial skills, because he has a visual processing disorder, visual spatial, hemianopia, et cetera. And then what are the math goals that he could work on that are at his grade level? So maybe he's going to have some that are lower and some that are higher, targeting different skill areas. And also it should be 4, oops, sorry, my mouse always goes crazy when I'm on Zoom. 4 goals, sorry, where did I go? 4+ goals, 1 for each area being assessed. So if they were saying we're going to do one for 2D shapes, 3D shapes, basic addition and subtraction, and identifying numbers at 80%, when at the end of the year, maybe they got 80% overall, but can't identify numbers at all. That's a problem, right? So we want to know each area broken down. Teams hate doing this. They don't want a lot. They're like, we don't want a lot of goals in the IEP, whatever. I think my son's final IEP had 37 goals in it, whatever. So it doesn't matter. As long as they can be met and addressed, and it's the exact same thing if you break this into 4 goals as it's 1, it's just going to make the data collection easier for progress monitoring. Okay. Here's an example. Within a structured and calm setting with limited visual distraction. So this says to me that when he's in a quiet room without any visual or auditory distraction, he can do this. But what about in the classroom, which is noisy and busy? What about, at a birthday party when they're playing Pin the Tail on the Donkey? What about, think about the different settings, right? So this is not, to me, not being addressed across all settings. And again, I would want to see this broken into 3 separate goals with benchmarks and accurate data reporting defined, okay? So this is just an overview on goals. Like I said, let's do an hour on goals later this year, and we'll do an hour on progress monitoring after that. Some things you can look at right now to help write your goals. We have a goal spreadsheet. I'll be sure to share that today in the resources. You can look at that. It's going to be a little overwhelming and confusing at first, but try to spend some time in there in the areas of need you think your child has and start to look at goals. Remember, you can't decide which goal is appropriate without the baseline, and that present levels has to reflect the need. You can look at your state standards, the Common Core state standards. I'll include these links. You can look up something called the I CAN checklists. They have them for each grade level and in math and language arts. That's where you as a parent can determine what your child can do, right? So it's an informal assessment you can do at home with your child and say, well, you're saying my child can do X, but I only see the child being able to do X. Or you're saying my child can't do X, but look at home, he did all of this, right? I was able to get, and you can video record it if you want and bring it to the team and say, at home, he's doing X, Y, and Z. Why is he not doing this at school? What supports need to be put in place? And then again, those Andrew F. talking points from understood.org, which I'll also include again today. Progress monitoring is the key to a strong IEP. So there's every piece I get to, I say this is the most important part, right? Every part is the most important part. But if you don't measure the growth from year to year, again, a bad present level statement is repeated from year to year. Bad goals are repeated from year to year. Progress monitoring is where we look at what the progress was on last year's goals before we even talk about this year's goals. So if your IEP, if you walk into the meeting and the first thing they want to do is say, oh, we wrote all new goals, let's start looking at, although they were so excited about our new goals, we can't wait to tell you what we've come up with. And they don't talk about what the progress was on last year's goals, and you never have that conversation. And they didn't meet any of their goals. And they just wrote all new ones, right? That's a denial of faith. That's a denial of a free and appropriate public education. You want to talk to an advocate, right? But this is key to determining that the child is making growth from year to year, right? The law says a single data point is not sufficient. So you have to make sure that you're getting you're looking at progress in detail. So let's talk about what that would look like. So the IEP team has to specify how the progress monitoring plan will be implemented. This has to all be written in the IEP. Identify who is responsible for data collection, along with the location, dates, and time of data collection. This is generally all in the goal, like we just saw, right? Measured by, data collection and observation by the teacher, at X time periods, whatever. So that has to be in there. The parents need to know how often progress on goals will be reported to them, right? Most schools will say, we'll give you progress updates as often as we give report cards. In some schools, that's only twice a year. In others, it's 3 or 4 times a year. That's not enough for our kids. 6 weeks is the maximum that you should be receiving a progress report with written progress updates on the goal for almost all goals. There's very rarely a goal I'll look at and say, we can wait a semester to find out how the child is doing on this goal. That would be me going to the gym and talking to a personal trainer and say, I want to run a marathon. And the trainer saying, okay, here's the list of things you need to do. I'll see you in 6 months. And I come back and I haven't done anything or I've done one thing, right? There was no progress monitoring. Nobody kept me on my toes and made sure I was doing, or I forgot how to do an exercise that he recommended or whatever. So you really need to make sure that you're getting regular progress reports. You have to understand the progress that is reported. They have to use clear language, no jargon. It needs to be, when they're writing the goals, the baseline statement should be written the same way as the annual goal, should be written the same way as the progress is reported. So it shouldn't be confusing. I don't have it with me, unfortunately, today, but I'll try to find it and send it in when I follow up. I have an example of where that wasn't done. If you're looking at the progress on the goal, and the goal is something like, the student will do X behavior 5 out of 5 times, in 5 out of 5 trials, 80% of the time. And the goal is talking about something completely unrelated or doesn't have any measurement marker in it. It's like, so-and-so is doing really well on this goal. We're really happy with his progress. Like, I see that all the time. What does that tell you? That's not data reporting. That's a statement, a subjective statement by the teacher to get out of actually telling you where the child is in terms of progress on that goal. You want to compare the student's baseline performance to grade level expectations. So when they say your child went from this level to this level in reading this year, great. How did all the other typical kids in 2nd grade, what was their progress this year? And they might say, well, they went up, 4 levels in this. What is the gap? How do we fix that? How do we address that? Is there going to be more intervention needed? Are there additional supports needed? Is this the right setting for my child's instruction, et cetera? Are you really thinking about that? Make sure you include the dates that progress measures were done and the names of the measurement tools. That sentence is from a guide for teachers on writing progress reports, by the way. So if they don't tell you in their progress report the date that the data was collected and what type of data collection tool they used, it's also not good data collection. That would be like me going back to my personal trainer for the marathon and saying, yeah, I think I weighed about 140 pounds that week, but I didn't use a scale. I was too lazy, right? Not helpful, right? So we want details. And then use that performance criteria from the annual goals. So perform a task with 85% accuracy and 5 out of 5 observations, or read at a rate of 95 words per minute with less than 5 errors in 3 out of 3 reading passages, et cetera. Data needs to be objective, not subjective. The other thing is that the staff that's collecting this data has to be trained in data collection for that area. So remember how I talked about the para collecting maybe behavior data or social communication data for the speech therapist? If the person collecting the data isn't trained in collecting the data, it's not going to be good data, right? So you can ask who's collecting data. Oh, the para does it. Great. What training did the para have in collecting data on reading progress, right? Because they're not a special ed teacher, or behavior progress, because they're not a behaviorist. You can ask that question and you should find out, you should know. Okay. You can track your child's progress. I actually just added another power hour for mid-March at the request of a parent on how to keep everything organized. So I'm going to talk more about this kind of data collection in detail, but I'll just say you can create a simple spreadsheet where you put in, and it will not be simple by the time you're done, but where you put in the child's goal, Special education is like, what are they getting? What special education they're receiving to meet the goal? What are the supplementary aids and services, related services, et cetera? You can add all this or not. And then put their progress reports in. And then was the goal met? So that at the end of the year, you have this little data sheet and you can look at that last column or even the progress reports and say, the goals weren't met or these progress reports don't make sense. I wouldn't wait till the end of the year if you're not receiving or understanding progress reports throughout the year, you need to stop and ask for those, okay? Here's a couple of examples of progress. So the goal was that he will solve the problems with 80% accuracy in 2 out of 3 trials. The first one was he is a hardworking, detail-oriented student and he knows all his multiplication facts. So that doesn't really address the goal as written. Then they say he had completed the goal, which is great, but I don't really know how he got from there to there. So, I found that reporting a little odd. This one was he'll be able to tell the summary of the main idea and pertinent details in each paragraph and answer multiple choice or open-ended comprehension questions. Again, here, the first comment is he still struggles with comprehending typical 4th grade text due to its length. Not a good progress report. I want to know, based on how this is written, that he was able to do this task that we want him to do with 80% accuracy, that right now he's only at 20% accuracy, right, in this first progress reporting period. That's fine. That's why we have the goal, but you want the data, right? And then you want to he's showing some progress, et cetera. Here we got a 70% accuracy. So finally they're reporting related to what the goal said. Okay. I think I'm going to run out of time again, and I'm really sorry. This is a very bad presenter tactic, and I'm not ever supposed to do this, but I will wrap it up in recording if anyone needs to jump off, and you'll see it on the recording. Okay, so then now the law says that according to IDEA, which you haven't read it, I highly recommend you print it out and read it. Well, maybe not print it out, it's very long, but at least read it. But the law says there has to be a statement of the special education and related services and supplementary aids and services based on peer-reviewed research to the extent practicable to be provided to the child or on behalf of the child, and a statement of the program modifications or supports for school personnel that will be provided to enable the child to advance appropriately toward attaining the goals, to be involved in and make progress in the general education curriculum, and participate in extracurricular and non-academic activities, and to be educated and participate with other children with and without disabilities in the activities described in this section. So what does that mean? I should have been showing you that slide while we were talking. Sorry about that. Let me go over here. So let's break this down a little bit, okay? So what is special education? Generally, we think of it as the specially designed instruction the child receives in order to access that general curriculum or make progress on their goals. So the law says that special education this is under IDEA again, this is section 300.39. It's also in 300.30, that whole section, which is listed on the left there. Specially designed instruction means adapting as appropriate the needs of an eligible child under this part, which means our kids, the content, methodology, or delivery instruction to address the unique needs of the child that result from the disability, and to ensure the child has access to the general curriculum, etc. So what does that mean for us? So content, that could be modified classwork. It could be accommodated classwork. Julie and I were talking offline about how, or maybe we talked about it last week, how you could ask the student to do fewer math problems rather than rote work where they're just like doing it over and over again to show what they know without it being a modification, because modification changes the content and is setting the child at a lower standard, but they could have an accommodation that even changes the content a little bit. The methodology, do they need a specific literacy instruction to learn how to read, or the delivery of an instruction? So do they need that in a quiet room? Do they need questions read aloud to them, etc.? And then in the part 2 there, so that the child can meet the educational standards within the jurisdiction of the public agency. This means, is the child making progress so that they can graduate with a real diploma at the end? And on the right are some ways in which those specially designed instruction, what it might look like: intensive academic remediation, which is tutoring, a specific methodology, behavior therapy, for example. Is it in a variety of settings, including in the home? Can the child do this skill everywhere, not just at school in one room? And then travel training, vocational education, et cetera. So this is I'm going to show you a couple quick examples of what these modifications, this IEP stuck modifications and SDIs together. I kind of think especially designed instruction more like instruction approaches or methodology that the teacher will use, and modifications and accommodations are more about how are we changing or accommodating the coursework for the student, but these were kind of all lumped together. I'm not going to read through all of them. You will get the slides afterwards. But this gives you an idea of all the different types of accommodations that might be in place. There's quite a lot here. I don't even think I put all of them in that we're in. So this is what also kept me awake at night, thinking that all of this is here in this child's IEP, but this parent was coming to me because the school team wasn't doing what was written in the IEP, right? So again, this is where you need to talk to an advocate or an attorney and figure out how are we going to hold the district's feet to the fire to get them to do what they've pretty much agreed to do within the IEP. Accommodations and modifications are to help the child meet the goals and access their educational environment. The IEP should explain how these accommodations and modifications, how they're needed and how they'll be used by the student. What support and services are needed in non-academic activities as well. So that's PE, library time, assemblies, field trips, etc. We have a new guide that we're working on right now. That's an education resource guide for students after epilepsy surgery. That's another ginormous spreadsheet that's going to be out very soon, and that has a lot of suggestions in this area. Be aware that accommodations do not lower expectations. They address things like timing and scheduling, setting, presentation, response. Modifications, however, do lower the expectations, and they can increase the gap between the achievement of a student with a disability and the expectation. So just be aware of that. Also, I've seen parents where the child graduated from their special day class or your self-contained classroom from high school with honors, but they actually didn't have a regular diploma. So their curriculum, they did very well in that setting, but it was not aligned to the state standards for a diploma. So you want to just be really aware as you're leading up to that. What diploma track is your child on? If you don't know, ask. They might say, well, your child is way too young for us to be thinking about that. They're only in second grade, but they're taking the alternate assessment and there are tons of modifications. And you're going to be asking them, well, how, when they get to high school and they're earning credits to graduate, are they going to be prepared for that 9th grade level high school work if all this is going on, right? You want to just really be clear about that. Again, here are some more examples of supplementary aids and services, modifications, et cetera. Let's see here. All right. So supplementary aids and services are provided in regular education classes or other education related settings such as extracurricular, et cetera, to help the children be educated with non-disabled children. This is where your one-to-one aid comes in. This is where you're saying, what does this child need in order to do what everyone else is doing, right? So if they need notes given to them at their desk rather than having to read from the board, that would be an example, right? So whatever aid, service, or support that is going to help your child be educated with their peers, that's that piece. Related services help the child meet their goals. It help the child benefit from their special education program. There are so many related services, and the law says that this is the list from the law from IDEA, you can look it up. But they also said that if a service is necessary for the child to benefit from his or her special education program, the service must be provided even if it's not included in this list. So if your child has a need that is not on this list and they say, sorry, it's not a related service that we offer, well, but my child's unique needs, in order for them to access the curriculum, they require X. I had a student I helped once who was receiving home instruction from a robot, from a teaching robot that zoomed into the classroom and interacted with the student and all of that. So whatever, I mean, that's not on this list. There's no teaching robot on this list, right? So really think about what the child needs. Here's an example of what related services, how they would be laid out. This is from, I think, from my son's IEP. So it'll say what the service is, who's providing it. So see that provider district service versus provider non-public school. So my son was in a non-public school, which is a private school that is certified by the state, so they could put it on my child's IEP. The school district provided some of the services and some of them were provided at that private school. So you're thinking about that. Is it individual or group? Maybe they need both. How often? And then any comments, you can have a lot more comments than what was there, but just to be aware that you want to also understand all of this and know what it's saying. Okay. And then let's talk about supports for school personnel. This is what the staff needs in order to implement the child's IEP. This section is almost always blank on every IEP I look at, by the way. So what are the supports and modifications that assist the staff in supporting the implementation of the IEP? It could be training for the staff. It could be special equipment or resources for providing instruction or supports. It could be collaborative planning time between the gen ed teacher, the special ed teacher, and or related service providers. It could be related service provider time to talk to the parent, right? So thinking about what that might be, this was what that looked like on my sample IEP. Just to give you an idea, I would like a time frame month rather than monthly. I would like to see how many minutes per month, but we don't get everything we want. Extended school year should be discussed by your child's team. Does the child have, technically they need to show regression over the summer. If you want extended school year, which a lot of our kids do benefit from, you have to make sure they're collecting data in June and in August, right? So you can really show, look, my child did not make progress. Sometimes based on the disability alone, the team will be like, well, of course they're going to need extended school year, right? They can't go that long. Extended school year does not have to be 4 or 5 weeks long or whatever the district offers, by the way. Extended school year should be whatever your student needs. If your student requires 12 months of instruction, they should receive 12 months of instruction, okay? And this is some specifics like that must have a chair with arms at the extended school year placement. This is the goals they're going to work on. So I think a lot of teams will only pick and choose a few goals. They'll say, we don't have time to work on all these goals because the school day is shorter. And the classroom is actually bigger because during regular school year, your child only has 8 students in their class, but ESY, they're going to have 12. So all of these things are red flags for you to say, well, but my child needs the goals to be worked on year round and 12 is not the right setting for them. And how are you going to address all of these other needs? So just really be clear about what it is that is being offered and why and how often, and really, really spell it out. Educational placement. Again, parents often come to me and this is the first question they want to talk about. Notice how far at the end of the IEP, we're getting to talk this process, we're talking about it. So you can't talk about placement until you have done everything else. And I apologize for going over. I'll wrap up here in just a minute. So this has to define, when they define the date, frequency, location, and duration of services, they have to include how much time in the general education setting will the child be. It has to be the first presumed placement of every child with a disability. General ed setting is the first presumed placement for every child with a disability. So what we want to see is what do they need to do to help the child access that general education curriculum. And then they have to spell out all of these details, like when will services and modifications begin? How often will they happen? How long will they last? Where will they take place? All of that. We also want to be sure to identify full inclusion or integration opportunities and support that is needed for success. So the supplementary aids and services to accommodate might include a trained aide. It might include use of a tape recorder. It might include an inclusion specialist to help the regular ed teacher modify the curriculum. It might include a behavioral plan to address disruptive behavior, et cetera. It also, in a minute, we're going to talk about the percentage of time they're with their peers. Julie Gardner, our educational specialist expert, who will talk about a lot of this next week, I believe, as well. Do not let them talk about placement until you've agreed to the contents of the IEP. So important, because remember, it all builds on it, right? So first you're talking about the child's needs. Then you're saying, well, these are the needs. Now these are the goals. Now we've just agreed on appropriate goals. Now, in order for her to meet those goals, what are the services, accommodations, modifications, and support for school personnel that are going to be needed for my child to meet those goals? Then you're going to be, because again, like that ESY that's in the classroom with 12 people in a shorter school day and the teacher doesn't have time to work on all the goals. We've just now discovered that that's not appropriate, right? So we're going to have to say, well, but this is what this child's needs are. And then now we can talk about what an appropriate placement would be. It can't just be a canned, like, this is where we're putting you. I see this for ESY all the time. For the regular school year, though, you don't want to talk about placement until you discuss all the needs, all the support needs, all the services, et cetera. And then the team can help you determine what is that setting where that can be, those needs can be addressed. Here is an example of the different types of support that might be implemented. Learning support, is it the neighborhood school? Again, the law really emphasizes having the child close to home and gen ed as much as possible. Supplemental education supports rather than full-time, which is interesting, learning support, et cetera. What other things might be needed? This child needs blind, visually impaired support, deaf and hard of hearing support, multiple disability support, maybe life skills, maybe emotional, right? Maybe autistic, maybe all of them. So just make sure you're clear when they talk about the type of the program that you're nodding your head and saying, yes, I agree with this. This looks great. This is exactly what my child needs. And then if they move the child out of the neighborhood school or out of the gen ed setting, they have to check a box usually, but I would want a statement as well as to why the child is being moved. So my son's IEP always had a statement that explained we moved him to this non-public school that's a separate setting, which is the most restrictive environment, but he didn't need a one-to-one aid and he had better support. So we actually articulated that in detail. I'm sorry, I don't have that example. The educational setting or environment. So what are the reasons the student would not be included in the gen ed for any reason, anytime? So according to the law, it has to contain an explanation of the extent, if any, to which the child will not participate with their gen ed peers, a statement of the special ed and related services that help them access that curriculum. So we want to ensure that there's a continuum of alternative placements available to meet the needs of the child so that they're educated with non-disabled children, that they are not removed from the regular educational environment, and that they are able to participate in regular education classes with the use of supplementary aids and services. Educational setting decisions should not be made by one individual. They should not be determined once in a child's educational career or only when determining eligibility. They should not be based on the disability category, and they should not be predetermined based on easily available programming or one size fits all, which of course I see all the time. So unfortunately, it is what it is. But let's give the example of this child's IEP that I've been using as an example. Last year when he was in gen ed setting, he was in you can see the bubble there, 89% of the day he was in the regular education classroom. You can see they have this formula down at the bottom just to confuse parents. It's, I'm joking, but not really. And now that he's in a separate setting, he's accessing his gen ed peers 32% of the day. So why, maybe this is right. Like I wanted my son moved to that non-public school where he was included with gen ed peers 0% of the day. And I was happy to have that, right? But you need to really understand this. A lot of people don't ever look at this page. They don't even know what it means. Okay, so really, really important. Another sneaky little page that may or may not exist on your child's IEP, but existed on mine, and I found it when my son was like 12. So promotion criteria. This is how will the child be moved from grade to grade. We're not talking about graduation or moving from middle school to high school or anything like that. We're talking grade to grade promotion. How does the child get moved from grade to grade? What criteria are we using? Because almost every school district says that if a child fails all their classes, they can't move on to the next grade, right? So I noticed on my son's IEP that they had checked progress on goals and unchecked district progress without me knowing about it or even knowing what it meant. And what it means is that instead of looking at grade level curriculum and content for his promotion criteria, they were only determining whether or not he had met his goals, his individual IEP goals. This is a huge red flag to me. I don't think any child should have this. So I think that district progress, you might have a line here that says, we are grading this child on district progress, but knowing that they are 1 to 2 grade levels behind their peers, but they're continuing to make grade level progress. I would be okay with that. And it could be that and progress on goals. It shouldn't just be progress on goals, because then that means their content is not aligned to the general curriculum at all. There's no requirement for them to be part of the general curriculum when they uncheck that box. Oops, sorry, wrong button. Consent. You have to give consent for the initial IEP for the provision of special education services and related services. Federal law is silent on the subsequent IEPs. Some states have what's known as stay put or consent every year. I'm in a consent state, which I'm thrilled about. You need to find out what your state says, which means that if they write an IEP for my child and I don't like it, I can just say, no, thanks. I'm going to stick with what we've got. I'm not signing that IEP. And I have that power, right? Because I live in California. I don't know off the top of my head which states those are. So you can check your local state agencies. I can also partially consent. So they can write something that I think is just ridiculous and say, I agree to implementation only, but I don't agree that this provides FAPE to my child. I can disagree with many aspects of it. That this is in a consent state. I think that in some states, like in Pennsylvania, if you disagree, it triggers another meeting, IEP meeting, and then you have to have the conversation again. Don't sign the IEP at the meeting, take it home with you, read through it, make sure, look at your evaluation reports that you've had done and see, is this really reflected here? Do I agree with all this? Meet with a friend to talk about the goals, show it to your spouse, whatever you want to do. If you sign the IEP and change your mind, in some states, you can withdraw your consent. It depends on the state. So at the beginning, I talked about the parts of the individualized education plan. There are some things we didn't talk about today. We just don't have time. So I have covered them in other webinars. I'm happy to, if you have questions about these, I can talk more about it another time. But does your child have a seizure action plan, an individualized healthcare plan? Those may include a safety and emergency plan, right? What happens if there's an active shooter and your child can't stay quiet? What if there's a earthquake and they can't get under a desk, right? All of those things. What if there's a fire drill and the handrail in the emergency stairwell, there's no handrails and your child needs handrails to go down the stairs safely, right? All of that needs to be spelled out somewhere in the IEP. I don't want separate documents. If there's a seizure action plan, an emergency healthcare plan, a safety plan, I want that all put into the IEP, even though it makes the document longer, because no one looks at the attachments. Virtual learning plan, a lot of districts are doing this now, where they're creating a plan for what would happen in the event of another major pandemic where everyone has to work from home. You have to agree to it. If it's not comprehensive and covering everything your child needs, you can say no. That looks great as a starting point, but my child will probably also require one-to-one tutoring weekly to access this, or will need an aide at home to help them access the webinar or the Zoom, because my child can't access that independently, whatever. This is also missing transition planning. I'm doing actually a 4-hour presentation at COPA in a couple of weeks about this, which hopefully some of you will be there. This is a very detailed topic. We have a transition course. If any of you want it, please email me. I'll send you the free link to that. That's 10 hours long. So we didn't have time to cover that today. Some schools have things like gifted support services. You can be gifted and have a disability. You can be gifted and have an IEP. You can be gifted and have a 504. So whatever services are available for gifted students, your child is a student first. Whatever services are on the campus for a student, your child is a student first. So if they say there's a literacy support teacher, but she only works with the gen ed students, that's a problem, right? That's an ADA violation right there. Why are they not giving the service that's available to any student? Why won't they provide that to your student? I'll think about that, right? Some IEPs also have a section that says, I agree to allow you to bill Medi-Cal, Medicaid, medical insurance, whatever billing for these related services. Do you have to check that box? No. Should you? That's up to you. For my son, it was for Medi-Cal, which is our state Medicaid, and I always checked yes, because we did not max out our Medicaid services in any other way. We didn't use them that much, right? But if your child has really intensive Medicaid needs and you're using everything on your Medicaid waiver every year, you don't want them taking anything out of that. You don't want to run out of money for your child's medical needs because they're taking some of that for the services that are being provided at school, because the school district ultimately is responsible for providing that. So you need to look into that a little more and learn about that. At the end of the day, the IEP is individualized. What does your child need? The law says several places throughout IDEA, this is not an exhaustive list. If it's not on this list and the child still needs it, they still get it. I'm going to send you a link about the Medicaid billing consent as well when I send the follow-up resources. So I told you at the beginning that an IEP is incredibly excessive paperwork. I just want to highlight here, if it wasn't in writing, it didn't happen. So when you have a conversation with the IEP team, if you're not recording it, if you're not allowed to record it, you send a polite email after the IEP meeting and say, I really enjoyed meeting with the team today. My understanding is the team has agreed to, and then you spell out the agreements very simply, bullet list, like one-to-one aid in all settings, trained with a backup trained aid, one-on-one literacy intervention in a quiet room 5 days a week for 60 minutes using X curriculum. Whatever it is that you agreed to, that you think they agreed to, you can just say it in an email. Non-response under the eyes of the law is that they agreed to it. That's tacit response, right? So if you send an email and they don't respond, print it out and put it in your file because they've now agreed to that. And then if you run into the principal in the hallway and say, oh, of course your child can go on the field trip next week. We have an extra aide coming in that day just so they can go. You want to follow up with an email and say, hey, I'm really glad I ran into you. I loved hearing all about your vacation in Hawaii. And I'm really glad you're going to let my child go on the field trip with that trained aide that you promised, right? If it wasn't in writing, it didn't happen. Very important. Use your procedural safeguards. If you don't know what they are, we have the webinars that Monica did, our IEP 101 series on our YouTube channel goes over this in detail. I just want to make one note here about outside evaluations. Sometimes they get confused with independent educational evaluations. That's not the same thing. If you bring an outside evaluation to your school team, the parent, the results of the evaluation must be considered, but if it meets agency criteria, but they have to, the team decides about whether or not they need to implement the findings and recommendations to provide FAPE to the child in the school setting. So a little bit nuanced there. I'm happy to address that also in a further, in a future power hour, et cetera. A few great resources. I'm sending you the slides and links here. If you haven't checked any of these out, I highly recommend it. The Council of Parent Advocates and Attorneys, their conference this year is both virtual and in person, the entire conference. It's not cheap. I think it's about $400, but you get everything. You'll get every single webinar and PowerPoint slides and all. We have to write a white paper for every session we do. And it's only $50 a year to be a member. The conference, unfortunately, is a little more expensive, but they have tons of free trainings for parents. There's lots and lots of great agencies out there. That's it. It took way longer than I wanted it to. I don't know if anyone is left with me, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, or we can follow up at a later date. Anyone want to unmute and ask a question or put it in the chat?
Audrey, we do have a question, Heather and I. So she was denied an educational